Hello, everyone. I'm Russ of Aquarimax, and I am here with Dominique DiFalco. She has volunteered at the Cincinnati Zoo. She's also volunteered at the Newport Aquarium and is now the intake coordinator for Arrowhead Reptile Rescue. She's got a lot of cool things going on. In addition to the pythons and geckos that she keeps, she also is the host of the podcast, the Modern Medusa Podcast. And make sure I get the name right, Dominique. It is the Female Herpers and Reptile Keepers Facebook group.
Yes, that's correct.
Got the name right. Okay, awesome. Mm-hmm. So anything else you'd like to fill in?
No, I think you kind of got it. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a snake enthusiast at heart, and then kind of just venture into the world of everything else. And then first and foremost, I'm just super passionate about getting women involved in the hobby.
Which I think is absolutely awesome.
Thanks.
We were talking a little bit before the podcast how I've got everyone, all the women in my immediate family have at least one reptile or amphibian as a pet.
Yeah, I think that's what every woman needs is at least one reptile or amphibian, right?
Yep. I think that would go a long way toward making the world a happier place.
Absolutely.
So, look, 503 Menagerie. Loves your Facebook group already.
Yeah. Hey, how are you?
And we've got a lot of people in the chat, everybody. So welcome. Instead of trying to list your own names, I'm just going to say welcome. It's exciting you're all here. We're excited that Dominique is here. I'm going to jump into some questions. So the first question, what sparked your interest in reptiles from the beginning? How did you get into the hobby?
Oh gosh. So I think I've thought about this a lot because, I think there's different phases of like getting into the hobby because I was an animal enthusiast since I was a kid. And then I only got into the hobby about 3 or 4 years ago. But when I think back, like my very first interest in reptiles, my grandparents had a lake house, or they still have a lake house in upstate New York in the Adirondack Park. And we used to do what we called salamander hunting, where we would find the red eft form of the eastern newts along. And I used to just spend my mornings doing that. And I would just sit at the beach in the lake and just grab every frog I could. And I'd try to make like a little biotope in like a tub. And then every night we'd just pour it out and catch the same frogs the next day. Those poor frogs. But that's really where I like first discovered like, I kind of like the creepy crawlies. And then I just from there kept reading about them. And then I took a pretty significant break from probably like 7th grade actually until college before I really reignited that passion for myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it sounds pretty familiar to me. We had shared some of the same experiences.
Mm-hmm. I think most of us were catching frogs when we were young.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I also think it's cool because I volunteered and worked at zoos too. And so we share that. It's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience volunteering at the zoo and the aquarium?
Yeah. So when I was in college, I graduated from college in 2020 and I studied business. And it took until about my second year of college to be like, damn, business is boring. I really should have been a scientist, but I wanted to kind of finish what I was working with. So I looked for ways to get involved with animals because I was, like I said, reigniting that passion for myself. And I applied to volunteer at the Cincinnati Zoo, which was just down the street from where I lived in college. And I got a position in the interpretive department, which is kind of like any of the animals that you go to the zoo and you can touch, that's the interpretive department. So it ranged from hissing cockroaches to snakes to anteaters to the Bearcats, because we're the Cincinnati Bearcats. So of course we had a couple of Bearcats there. So for about 2 years in college, every Saturday morning I woke up and I was at the zoo at 8 a.m., which for a college student is very difficult to do on Saturday mornings. And I was cleaning poop and I was talking with the keepers every Saturday morning. And then in 2020, I got an internship at the Newport Aquarium, which is our local aquarium. So on Saturdays, I was at the zoo volunteering in the interp department. And then on Sundays and Mondays, I was at the Newport Aquarium working with the penguins and the stingrays. So just so cool.
So you were doing both at the same time. That's pretty awesome. Part of the time.
Yeah, and maintaining my own collection and, all that fun stuff.
Keeping very busy.
Yeah, and being a full-time student and having a job. You just had to make it work, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to experience a lot of different animals in both of those capacities. That's a wide range.
Yeah.
That's
yes,
cool.
Absolutely. It was really cool. I think the coolest thing for me was definitely working with the penguins, because I didn't consider myself a bird person, but it is just a totally different world to work with penguins. I'm assuming that penguins are fairly different than other birds, but there's still similarities in how you interact, because working with the mammals, I didn't work as hands-on with most of the mammals. I did the wallabies and the armadillos and such, but the way they get to know you, and I put that in quotes, get to know you, is very different than the way the birds do. And it was just so cool to every day kind of have to switch my behaviors just enough to make sure that I was making the animals comfortable and also myself comfortable.
Yeah, I can kind of see what you mean. That's to bring back memories. I never worked with penguins, but I did work with some birds as a volunteer and working at the zoo. And they're a very different vibe from mammals for sure, or from reptiles, other reptiles. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So penguins are one of your.
It's interesting. Oh, stop! No, I was just gonna say it's interesting how you work with them for a little bit and the calls all sound the same, but then soon you can kind of figure out what they're saying, and it's weird because you wouldn't necessarily think that you could pick that up, but pretty quickly you start to learn that they really do vocalize in a very unique way.
That is so cool. That makes me want to work with penguins now.
That's you have to. Everyone should.
That is very cool. So I want to give you a chance to just kind of talk a little bit about the kind of your two projects that have the same mission, your podcast and your Facebook group, and just kind of tell everybody what they are, what they're about, and so on.
Yeah. So I touched on it a little bit, but so when I was in school, I studied business. I was specifically studying information systems, which is a very male-dominated career. It's IT essentially. And I was doing that at the same time that I was getting into the hobby. And I noticed that in my professional life and then also in my social life, being the hobby, I was in very male-dominated spaces. So one of the things that I was very involved with in school was women in technology programs, and now I do women in construction programs at work. So I recognized that there were a lot of these groups that were available professionally and academically, but that didn't really relate to the hobby aspect as well. So I saw a need, and at first it was just kind of I want a girl gang. I want to meet other women that are interested in the same things as me. And it very quickly snowballed into something much bigger than what I originally expected. So now our group is well over 10,000 members, and my podcast is, doing really well. And I've had some really amazing guests, and it's thrilling.
That is awesome. Just to let everybody know, your Facebook group, you just started in June of 2020, right? So it's about a year and a half-ish old.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's got over 10,000 members. That's impressive.
It's obviously crazy.
You're obviously feeling a need. The need was there, and people saw that you were filling that need, so they're flocking to this Facebook group, which I think is awesome. That's fabulous. So
thank you.
The podcast, I don't remember when you started. As I told you before, this podcast started, I started when your very first episode started, because I was listening to From the Ground Up. And when it transitioned, I was right there, and I didn't miss a beat. And I've listened to every single episode since and really enjoyed it. But I don't remember when it started. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So you mentioned From the Ground Up, which is my RSS feed. So For people who don't understand podcasts, essentially like an RSS feed is where all of the podcasts are held. And it's kind of like your channel, but it's across everything. So Joe Phelan had the From the Ground Up Reptile podcast, which was extremely successful. An absolute wealth of knowledge. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend. And Joe's a good friend of mine. So when we've been talking about how I noticed that I wanted to see more female representation on podcasts. Oh, my snake just fell off the table.
Oh,
it's a short table, so don't worry. I was preparing to show you something, and she's just being a little lively. Sorry about that.
no worries.
So I at the time that I was talking to Joe about starting a podcast for women, he was actually looking at taking a step back from the hobby a little bit. And it was a perfect transition for me to kind of continue his legacy and continue his hard work, but with a new angle. So I started my show in January of 2021. So we just had 1 year. And I think I had 27 episodes out last year. So tried to do one every 2 weeks or so. I'm a one-woman crew, so it gets a little busy.
Understandable. Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you haven't checked it out, go check out the Modern Medusa Podcast. And you can get it pretty much anywhere you can listen to podcasts. I use my iPad usually, or my iPhone, but you can get it pretty much anywhere. And it's really fun. In a lot of the earlier episodes, when you do like a historical figure from women in herpetoculture, kind of showcase them, and then you'd also interview, current women in herpetoculture. And now it's more focused on the current ones, it seems like, because there unfortunately aren't that many in history, as many as we would like. So, that's for sure. We've got a super chat just came in from Summer.
Oh, thank you, Summer.
Oh, this is so cool. So for those of you who are just listening, this says Dominique's passion. This is from Summer N. Dominique's passion to get more women involved in the hobby is so admirable. I hope to one day make such a positive impact as well. That's awesome. That's
incredibly sweet.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We really appreciate that. And I agree. I think it's fantastic. This is an interesting thing. I don't think I sent you anything about this in the questions that I sent, but do you have any thoughts about this? In the reptile hobby, there are a lot of aspects of the reptile hobby that are male dominated, right? Mm-hmm. Have you thought about that in terms of the invertebrate hobby?
I have a little bit. So that's interesting because I'm not an invert person myself as much. Right. I definitely have a few isopod species, and I've spoken with some people who work with isopods and other inverts. And I think that's one thing I've noticed is that there are pockets of the hobby that either have a lot more female representation or are overly abundant with women. Like isopods seems like a big one, and then as well as crested geckos and leopard geckos, and it's interesting to see these little pockets of it. If I were to guess like why that happened, and this is just me kind of spitballing out there, is that these may be areas of the hobby that women got into earlier, and then other women saw female role models within it and had more of a drive to do it themselves. But I'd be really interested. I wish we could do like more of an in-depth study to see how women are across the board within like the different groups within reptiles and invertebrates.
Mm-hmm. That would be really interesting to find out. There was a doctor, I think her name is Linda Rayner, and maybe I have the name wrong, but recently on the Tarantula Collective, she was interviewed, and she is an arachnologist, and she mentioned that in spider behavior, women dominate. So just like you were mentioning that things like isopods, certain niches like isopods or crested geckos, women tend to be really common and more, it's a more balanced, or sometimes even the female dominated. And that's really interesting that spider behavior for some reason is also female dominated. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I need to listen to that episode. And I did interview her on my podcast, but if people haven't checked her out yet, Dr. Emily Taylor is probably one of my like favorite herpetologists in the world. And she led a study on women in research papers in herpetology for the past like 50 years. And I can't remember her exact statistics, so I don't want to get it wrong, but she did break down how women are seen across like snakes, lizards, turtles, and tortoises, amphibians, and talked about that a little bit, which was really interesting. And one of the things we talked about was that in Sicilian research, which are one of the weirdest animals, and I want to get my hands on one so bad, so few women. And it's kind of like asking those questions as to why, and maybe what is it that's happening within these certain sects that's either discouraging women for coming in or is being seen as like more male dominated.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder what that is, but it is super interesting. And here's a comment from 503. Oh, we're going to do Devin and then 503. Here we go. Here's Devin's. Mm-hmm. So Devin says, one of my fave invert companies to buy from, Bitty Bugs, is awesome, and female-led as well as queer-led. Super awesome. Oh, yeah. I love Bitty Bugs.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Cassie, I know Cassie at Bitty Bugs. She's one of my patrons, and I've had done a video with unboxing some isopods she sent me, and she's fantastic.
Yeah.
Great stuff. So totally agree. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I'll just tap into something that Devin said, mentioning queer-led. This isn't a group that I run, but there is an LGBTQ reptile enthusiast Facebook group. I have to remember the exact link, but I'll send it to you, Russ, that I also recommend people joining if you do fall into that queer space and you want to find a community around reptiles of that.
Yeah, so I can put that in the description once you send it to me.
Awesome.
Of this video. That's awesome. And here is another one from 503 Menagerie. There are definitely women in the Isopod hobby quite a bit. Rachel from Pet Peds and Pods and Laura from Smugbug come to mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And Laura was just on my show. She was a fun interview.
Yeah, I enjoyed that interview a lot. And she's also been on my show, and so has Rachel. Both of those have been on my show.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yep. Good point. 503. And let's see. I like this one too. All the awesome guests. This is from Young Lads, thanking us for the awesome guests we've had on the channel. Content, animal knowledge that you guys give us helps me not give up on humans yet.
Yeah, you can't give up on the humans because someone's got to clean up the poop. So, you can't give up on the humans until there's no poop left to clean, right?
Exactly. Oh, here's another one. I don't know this particular resource, but maybe you're familiar with Lori Torini.
Lori is awesome. So Mr. and Mrs. Morelia immediately like your name because I'm a Morelia gal. So I don't know who that is, but Lori is phenomenal. So Lori is, she is a Morelia person. So for people who don't know Morelia, Morelia is the genus that kind of encompasses carpet pythons, green tree pythons, a lot of those species. And Lori Torini is a really big advocate for the choice-based handling and training in quotes of reptiles. She works a lot with Bredls pythons, doing tap training and target training. So she's really pushing the boundaries of the intelligence that comes with reptiles and how we can use that in the captive hobby. Oh,
yeah. I think maybe I've seen a little bit of what. I just didn't connect the name, but I think maybe I've seen some of the stuff. I think she has an equestrian background, which is how she got into this. Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah, she's very cool. I think it's amazing how much things like operant conditioning, the basic principles of operant conditioning can apply to reptiles. People don't often think of it. It totally makes sense. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Totally does. When I worked in the zoo, we used operant conditioning with tortoises and with lizards and even with snakes. I mean, it totally makes sense. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's interesting, especially, and I feel like you're in the same boat, but as someone who has had the opportunity to work in a zoo space as well as more private setting, is that there's a lot of things that zoos are doing that are kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit further as far as like animal intelligence and animal training, especially with reptiles, that it's awesome to have people like Lori pull in and like show that the everyday keeper can do it too. Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to tie into that. It's not just for people who have extensive experience with equines, like you were mentioning. That's a great way to start, but you can also start with from the ground up with reptiles. Yeah, no pun intended, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, someone's asking about tap training snakes. Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's a
Yes,
very common thing to do with snakes.
That Lori does a ton with that, and then also Summer Grace Mitchell, who is at Girls with Scales. She does a really good video about tap training snakes, especially defensive animals that maybe you're nervous about getting out of their cages. She does a really good one on that too.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna pop up some other questions I wanted to make sure I covered. So
I love this.
Yeah, this one says, what are some of the most common obstacles that women in the hobby face? Now, you've already touched on that to some degree, but is there something else you'd like to say on that topic?
I think it's just the similar issues that women can face in male-dominated spaces in general, whether it's work or it's, hobbies or things like that. I think like one of the biggest things is lack of representation, so not really having someone to look up to necessarily. But then also, unfortunately, there can be situations where men speak down to women. And I say men, it usually is men. Sometimes it can happen with women as well, speaking down to other women, which can discourage conversation and discourage people from standing up or asking more questions. So I think like that's the biggest thing, especially when people can hide behind a computer screen and say rude things in a comment or ignore people who maybe do have knowledge because they see that it's a woman in the picture and stuff. But luckily, I do think that the obstacles are coming down a bit, especially with the prevalence of social media and with the prevalence of really big name female influencers. Like Emily from Snake Discovery immediately comes to mind as someone that people look up to.
Right.
And I think as we just continue to have the conversations and point out where issues may be, like hopefully people will start to stand up and help other women out, so we don't have those obstacles in the future.
Right. That is the direction we want to be going. And as a man in herpetoculture, and I think of myself as someone who tries to be sensitive, but I also recognize that I may be missing things that I do wrong. I want to be sensitive to that and make sure that I'm avoiding problems that before they start and so on as much as possible. So what advice do you have for men like me who want to be supportive of women and just may be ignorant of things they might do by accident or things like that, like the biggest mistakes they could avoid, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I don't want to say it's mistakes because I feel like that implies that it's something wrong when it's not necessarily something wrong. It's just more of a not understanding completely, or it's a difference of how you grew up or how you approach the world. So I think one of the biggest things that I can say for men who want to advocate for women in the hobby is like a very tangible thing that I like to do is if I have a friend who's maybe interested in getting a new ball python of a specific gene or having someone on their podcast on a specific topic, I always offer a woman up as well. Like I always give like, here's my suggestion for a man who's a really good breeder. Here's also a female a female option as well. Or here's a scientist who also studies this that you might want to talk to. And it's kind of just like making yourself aware of like who's talking and who's having the opportunity to talk and kind of like lifting as you climb. And then the other big thing is just like listen when we maybe recognize a problem. I think that, most of the people are really good people. Like most guys in the hobby, like really want to support everyone, want everyone to be good and like help each other out. And it's when I say, hey, like this guy said something that made me uncomfortable or said something that I perceived as rude. Believe me when I say it, or believe the women who are telling you, and then recognize your own behaviors that may have made people feel that way in the past. And then, don't be afraid to ask. If you have a question like, is this, okay? Like not to get like too into drama or anything, but sometimes you see memes that are posted that may be funny, but then you take a step back and you look at it as objectifying women, or it's saying specific things about women and how they portray themselves. And like understand, like, is this funny because it's a good relatable joke, or is it funny at the expense of an entire portion of the hobby?
Right. That's a good point. Oh, here's another comment I want to pull up here. Cassie, we were just talking about bitty bugs, and Cassie is at Bitty Bugs, says, thanks for mentioning Bitty Bugs. We are so happy to have recognition as a queer women-owned business. All the support is so appreciated. Well, thank you, Cassie.
Heck yeah, Cassie.
Yeah, I just want to recognize Cassie for what you're doing. Bitty Bugs is awesome, and I've also appreciated your support of Aquarium X Pet. So thank you very much.
That's awesome. I'll definitely be checking you guys out on Bitty Bugs.
Yeah, definitely. They got some fun stuff going on. So a couple of people have made mention of the Lacey Act amendments. Can we take just a second to talk
Yes.
about that? Do you have any initial thoughts you want to
Absolutely.
express there? Okay.
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing is that like I would just say if you don't know what's happening with the Lacey Act Amendment right now, take a look at USARK. USARK is the United States Association of Reptile Keepers, and there is current legislation on the table that could potentially prevent our captive keeping, breeding, and transportation of reptiles and then other quote unquote exotic pets. And I'll let you kind of get into more of the details if people want to get into that. But I also want to say that's a quick reminder that don't just support USARK or support these initiatives when it's reactionary. It should be proactive. So, I donate $5 a month because that's what I can afford right now to USARK, so that in these situations, I know I can be helping out and hopefully prevent this from happening in the future.
Right. I think it's a great point because USARK they've had our back for a long time. They've been watching. They're always watching when legislation is going through to try to make sure things aren't sneaking past us. And this particular Lacey Act set of Lacey Act amendments was able to sneak past certain levels. I only found out about it, was it last week, something like that?
Yeah.
Because they kind of slipped it into a huge bill. But the thing is, the USARK is watching for that. And if they hadn't been, probably very few people would know about it right now. And so they're constantly watching out for all of us in the hobby, whatever aspect of the hobby we're in. If we're in herpetoculture, we're in invertebrates, we're in, like me, in both, or in not just that, fish, exotic mammals, birds, whatever you're into. They're protecting our rights, and there are a lot of people who are trying to take them away. So I want to point out a couple things. One is, just like Dominique already said, go to USARK, check it out. If you do a search for USARK Lacey Act, it'll pop up. You can see the things that are there, and it's got a summary of what's been going on. It explains the rules. It has some talking points. It has a letter. You can actually copy and paste a letter to send to your senators, which I highly recommend you do. But if you want to customize it, you can. It has a list of talking points that you can use in your letter. So what I did is I took the template, copied it, but then I went in and looked at the talking points and customized the letter for some things I wanted to highlight. And then I sent it to my senators. I also went and did a donation at USARK. And then I've been trying to spread the word. In YouTube videos, I participated in a live stream yesterday. I was a guest on. We talked about it. I've put it on Instagram and different places. So thousands of people, I've gotten the word out to thousands of people, but it's not enough for me to do that. We need everybody to be doing all three of those things. If everybody in the hobby did all three of those things, I think we'd be in a really good place. But we have to do it kind of quickly. We don't want to panic. We don't want to be apathetic. We want to be somewhere in the middle. We want to be proactive so that we are using our energy productively and just saying, these are the things I can do. I'm going to go do those. I'm not going to panic or give away all my animals. It's not going to be helpful. And I'm not going to say there's nothing I can do. This just sucks. We look at those three things and we do those three things. So please, everybody, go to the website, inform yourself, then write your senators and make a donation to USARK. And if you can become a member, do that.
Yeah. And I'll just also add that I think there's also things that we can just do in our everyday keeping to promote positive views of the hobby. So like personally, I have a quote personal code of ethics as far as like how I portray the hobby and making sure that I'm not posting feeding videos or things that can be upsetting to people that may have a negative impact on the hobby and not free handling venomous snakes, like being responsible with how people outside the hobby view us, because at the end of the day, we're going to need those who maybe don't understand as much on our side, because, there may be a kid who wants a ball python in 10 years. And if we're making ourselves look bad as a hobby, that could be affecting their future too.
Exactly. Very good points. The responsibility of what we're doing day to day is huge. I love the points that you brought up about the feeding videos and so on. It's a great point. And also, there was something else I was going to say that relates to that, which escapes me right now, and hopefully it'll come back later. But it's key. It doesn't affect just it doesn't even, this particular set of amendments, if it goes through, is not going to affect just one slice of the hobby. It's anybody who has anything besides cats, dogs, and farm animals. And it's going to affect people outside of the country, because there are a lot of economies, a lot of people, a lot of jobs that depend on working with the United States. They're importing animal supplies, or certain of the captive bred animals that we receive, like goldfish, for example, or bettas. A lot of those are coming from overseas, and they're people who are going to lose their livelihoods outside the country if this goes through.
Yeah.
So it's a huge thing. It's not just affecting the U.S. So if you're thinking, well, I'm in a different country, this doesn't affect me, it might. It might. So yeah, thank you for letting us have a minute to talk about that.
Of course.
So one thing I'm really excited to hear about, I've been excited for the podcast the whole time, but one question that I'm really looking forward to is, what are some specific positive impacts that you've seen as a result of your podcast, your Facebook group, just your efforts in general?
Oh gosh, it's hard for me to talk about this, because I never want to make it seem like I'm being like selfish, or like saying that I've made such a positive impact, because it's never just me. But sometimes, I just want to make sure that it never comes across as it's just a me thing. But I think like one of the biggest things I've seen is I've had people approach me and thank me for making a community, or thank me for allowing them to be in a space where that they feel supported and they feel uplifted. And that's a huge thing for me. And I think like one of the biggest things is like really building a sense of community, especially with the Facebook group, has been absolutely huge. Also, I'm going to interrupt for a second, because do you want to pull up that Mr. and Mrs. Morelia message? Because yeah. So there's for people who are watching, that there is a live on Dave Kaufman's channel about the Lacey Act right now. So if you want to hop on there after this, go ahead and grab that. And that's good. There's also going to be one on the Reptile Gumbo podcast with Ryan McVeigh. So Erica and Ryan McVeigh are big supporters of my podcast, and they're huge supporters of USARK. So definitely recommend checking that out. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Morelia, for that. That's great to hear. And we need to be informing ourselves. This is a great way to do it. If you don't know a lot about this would be a great way to start. Find out more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So kind of going back, I think the biggest thing is building this sense of community, and then a sense of empowerment for a lot of people to advocate for themselves, maybe in the spaces that aren't as friendly. One of the biggest things I've seen is in areas that may be toxic, or maybe had a negative reaction, especially if a woman posted something in another Facebook group or on another forum, there's often a comment that says like, hey, if you want good advice and you don't want judgment, join the Female Herpers and Reptile Keepers group. And the fact that other people are advocating for our group as a space that they feel comfortable and supported, even if it's maybe a controversial topic or something that they don't feel comfortable with asking other places, it's just such a small thing, but such a significant thing for me, that we're building a community where people do have the confidence to ask these questions that'll hopefully extend into the other communities as well.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. That's something that I've tried to make sure that that my community for Aquarium Expats is a safe space for everyone. I think there's a place for everyone in this hobby, as long as they love it and they can be they can try to be nice. Those are my only two requirements, right? Everybody should have a place, and so I think that's fantastic. It can be harder than you think to find a place like that. For some of you who may not have encountered that, I've encountered it. I've been in places where I ask an innocent question and get slammed. And I think that people need to be careful. There's a certain etiquette that needs to develop that hasn't in many places. I think when someone asks a question, you answer the question. When someone asks for a critique, you give a critique. Someone asks a simple question, don't give a critique.
Right. And I also just want to add, because something we haven't brought up yet, but I want to make sure is evident, is I speak about women a lot. The Female Herpers group specifically, then my podcast as well. I'm a huge advocate for non-binary people, because I think that when you fall into the gray area, you can also be overlooked. So Though the name is Female Herpers and Reptile Keepers, that's how it started. We've really evolved into a space that's extremely opening of LGBTQ people and people who fall on the trans or non-binary spectrum to make sure that truly we are supporting people not only in their hobby, but also like as who they are as people. Because when you have a hobby that takes up as much as your time as ours does, and it takes up not only your time, but like how much time do you spend listening to podcasts or thinking about your cages, or just it's truly like an all-encompassing part of your life. I want to make sure that people always feel good, happy, and safe, especially when they're in an organization or group that comes from my heart.
Yeah. And everybody needs that safe space. Everybody deserves it. Every single person. So it's nice that you're creating one that's inclusive like that. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, here's a comment from Scott's Animal Adventures. It says, how can we get women interested in the hobby? Because I've had any mention of exotic pets to women as a majority leads to negativity and fear in dating and friends.
Okay, so that's like very interesting because especially with the dating thing, I can attest to the opposite side of that usually I have a hard time getting guys interested in it. I think that just like in general, it's just understanding like what's the best way to do it. So for example, like I'm a woman, I have mostly female friends. I was in a sorority in college when I had my animals, and that often caused like a lot of the conversation and stuff. I think like recognizing that regardless of gender, if someone has a fear of our animals, they're probably going to say something about it. And so I have kind of my like, back pocket of answers to common fears or common misconceptions. But then also within my own collection, I have specific animals that I know people usually like. So that if you do get to the point where people are like, okay, well, I'll come over and see your animals, like I pull out Trash, the gargoyle gecko. His name is Trash. He's an excellent gecko. It's a joke. It's just a whole thing. But I pull out Trash, the gecko, first because he's beautiful. He's calm. And like he's fairly non-intimidating and kind of doing it that way. So yeah, I think just like educating, but also just being understanding that not everyone's going to be into it. As far as like dating wise, I see this with guys a lot too. I'm just very open with the fact that I have animals, and if they're not into it, they're not into it, and you just kind of have to accept it because I'm never gonna choose. Like it's always gonna be a part of who I am and what I do, regardless of who my partner is.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And there's some good comments here. Like here's comment from Christine saying that she has female friends on social media. They absolutely love what she has for pets, but they never really do say they would come to her house. So everybody has their limit, and you don't want to push it. Yeah.
But, I would. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that sometimes there's, it's like this. It's what 503 says about some of it's just exposure. You can get people interested. At first they're terrified, and later they want one.
Yeah. And I think it's just, like you don't just throw a big snake in someone's hands, and that's why we don't post the pictures of videos. I don't post feeding videos. I don't want to ever scare people with my animals because I don't like them because they're scary, right? So we don't want other people to think that. But I think like moving at their comfort level and also like recognizing that don't push it. But I have found that women will tend to like ask questions. So like let them ask questions, send them a snake discovery video. Be like, hey, look at this TikTok of this cute hognose snake, and kind of get that like fear away. And it's like can be a very innate fear for people and like get them interested and intrigued to ask questions.
Right. That seeing that transition between I'm just terrified to now I'm kind of intrigued. It can be remarkably fast if it's not pushed. Yeah. I've seen that a lot when I do outreach presentations, bringing live animals to a classroom or something like that. And I just at the beginning I say I'm not going to push any of this on you. You're welcome to come closer. You're welcome to touch certain things if you want to, but I'm never going to push it on you. And a lot of those people start out at the back of the room with their arm, their back is plastered against the wall, and then slowly, as it progresses, they come up and then they want to touch something. And then after, a lot of them will say, thank you, that was cool. That's as far as I wanted to go. And others will say, that was fascinating. I'm so glad I touched that. I feel so much better about it now. So, yeah.
Especially the touching thing, because it's like almost every single time people are like, oh, they're not slimy. And I'm like, I know, right? Like, it feels cool.
And a couple of people have mentioned this, that the Isopod hobby tends to be pretty welcoming. And I think that's true. There's something interesting about that. And it's also more balanced as far as we have a lot of women in the Isopod hobby, as well as a lot of men. It just tends to be more balanced, and maybe that has to do with it. It's just
yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to like the little pockets we were talking about. Like I got my start with green tree pythons, which is such a small part of the hobby in general that like you can't really afford to be a jerk because it's small, as opposed to maybe some of the larger sectors of the hobby that like have been male dominated and have like kind of thrived on that machismo, that makes them feel like it's okay to continue to act that way.
Yeah. Well, I think. Sorry, that was my train of thought. That happens. What was I going to say? It's gone. But I would love to see. We were talking a little bit earlier about your snakes, and I want to make sure we have time to show off some of your snakes that you were just talking about.
I did.
So I'm going to put you in solo view.
Perfect. I grabbed 3. So I wanted to kind of show 3 examples. So when I said one fell off the table the other day, it fell off of a stool. It was only like a foot tall, so don't worry. But I snagged a couple and put them in bags for you. So I primarily keep green tree pythons. That's really what my interest is in. But I also have a couple carpet pythons and then some ball pythons and then miscellaneous geckos as they come in. So I first wanted to pull out one of my ball pythons because, if you want a good show animal, something that's going to stay pretty still, this is a good one for you. So this is Mesa. She is a female pastel double het pied and axanthic ball python. So that's a little bit of a mouthful. She is actually here on a breeding loan from my good friend Matt Burton with KMB Reptiles. So this is my first ever year trying to breed anything. So awesome. Matt and I got involved in the what's called the Lightning Pied, which is Axanthic Pied's project about 2 years ago. So we bought her and then a male, 2 males and another female who I have as well as a part of this project. So this has been a long time coming. She's fattening up. She's been paired a couple times now. I'm hoping to see some eggs, but she's a little small, she's still kind of young. So she's just about 3 years old. So not pushing it too much, but I really think she's a gorgeous animal. Also, her tub needs to be cleaned. So a good excuse to get her out. So I do a mix of rack keeping and then also vivarium keeping. So I have like some of my vivs over here. And then I also have racks for these guys as well. So she's a very typical ball python where she refuses to eat frozen thawed, and she will not eat in anything bigger than a 28 quart tub. So no matter how many times we've tried to upgrade her, she immediately stops eating, stops acting normally. So she's my picky little girl. But
so she wants oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you any questions about her.
Okay. So she just likes her compact little lair. That's how she rolls.
Yeah, she does. Even when I've offered her like multiple hides, she just is not as into it. So she's also in shed. So I'm going to put her down for a minute. And then when I take my animals out, I usually do pillowcases or something similar, just because it's soft and it's a lot easier than a lot of different tubs.
Makes sense.
Got her all knotted up, and then I am a little paranoid, so I always make sure to use a lot of hand sanitizer in between animals, even though all of these animals have been in my collection for a while and I don't really have any concerns. The next
better safe than sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Next one I have for you is a really cool species. The Mr. and Mrs. Morelia will like this one. She is a hypo het stonewash Bredls python. So Morelia bredli, which, like we were talking about, Morelia is the genus for a lot of carpet pythons. And you can see she acts very differently than the ball python does.
Yes.
So for those who aren't familiar with ball pythons, they are a terrestrial species, whereas Bredls pythons here are called semi-arboreal. So you can see she'll like to climb a little bit. She loves glasses and my face, and there they go. Okay. And but she'll also spend a decent amount of time in her hide if you let her. So she is a hypomorph, so it's a little hard to see because of my light, but she's a much lighter than a lot of the other bredli, and she has this like bluish gray tint to her. So I believe this female is about 2 years old. She is really stunning. These are a larger species of carpet python. She could get a lot bigger. I tend to keep my animals smaller. I don't power feed, and I keep a more irregular feeding schedule just to kind of match what would happen in the wild a little bit more.
Right.
But as you can see, she's got excellent body condition. You can really see her showing off that semi-arboreal tendency as she wraps around my arm here. Oh, you want to say something? You want to say hi? Okay. And this is actually, this is a hot take, but I would argue that Bredls pythons are one of the best beginner species of snakes for people to keep. The first reason being is just they're stunning. They are a lower price point, but they're still not as disposable of a pet. You can get a nice Bredls python baby for about $200, $250, you know. They keep a very good size. They're pretty easy to handle once they're a little bit older. As babies, they can be a little nippy, but that's just a baby thing. And they are extremely tolerant as a species. So, oh my gosh, see, they move a lot. But for example, I was out of town this weekend, and the heater went out in one of their cages. And though that's not ideal, obviously, my mom was watching the animals. She's not as comfortable with them. And I knew that they'd be okay for a couple days in that 70-degree range. So that's like a nice thing if you're maybe trying to get the hang of reptile keeping. And this is a species that can deal with is a little bit more forgiving than a lot of the other ones are. Yeah. So
yeah. I love the size. Would you say you were saying that they tend to be pretty manageable in size? What would you say be the max length?
So that's a tougher one. So that goes again into kind of the whole idea of people who feed more are going to have bigger animals, especially with carpet pythons. They can be in that like 8-foot range, but that's going to be a really big female. This size, honestly, is about, it's pretty good for like an adult male. This is a female, obviously, like maybe a little bit bigger for an adult male, but I'd be happy if my male stayed this size for his entire life.
Okay.
And I'm not going to get him out because he's a little bit more annoyed with me right now.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Dope Critters. I appreciate that.
So Dope Critters is saying, new fan of Modern Medusa here. Do you have any bioactive enclosures?
Oh, okay. So I don't currently. I had a lot more geckos, but I actually got rid of a few of them pretty recently just because I have anxiety and depression. I talk about it pretty often. And so I like to be really conscious of what I keep and making sure that I'm keeping a manageable number of animals. And I kind of recognized that the geckos were becoming a little bit too much for myself. So I don't have any more bioactives now, but I do have a couple species of isopods. And I've got one gargoyle gecko that once he decides he is ready for a big boy cage, I'm hoping to do some bioactive for him.
Cool.
So I am going to, you can keep asking questions, but you guys get to see me do the fun trick of trying to get her back out from my arm. So give me 1 second. I'm going to try to put her in her cage.
Sure. Yeah. I love that size. I think that would be a great option for me to consider as far as snakes go. I'm glad you indicated that's a good beginner species. I have
Yeah.
never.
No, I'm super happy with her. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the fact that pythons have such cool head shapes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love all snakes. I mean, I often say snakes are kind of like horses. It's really hard to find an ugly snake. They're just all beautiful.
Oh yeah.
But the idea that I just love the way their heads kind of stand out, like maybe more than a corn snake or something like that. It's really cool, and a perfect sort of manageable size, but some heft to them, but not gigantic.
Yes, exactly. And I'm bringing another little baby over towards you. So I got 2 more animals I'll show you. So this right here, this is actually one of my newest animals. This is a striped jungle carpet python from Uwabami Reptiles, Billy Hunt, very good friend of mine. So this actually gives you a good idea of what a Bredls python baby would look like. So there's going to be about this size. They're small. You can see that like tail that they use to hang on. So this is another species of carpet python, kind of like cousins, not like totally related, but I think it's a good example of how they look. So
that's about the size
of a baby. Yeah.
Okay.
So this one's, gosh, I got her at Tinley. She was born this summer. She's probably like 7 months old. So, but she was also the runt of the litter.
Okay.
So this animal specifically was a gift from Billy, because if you can see here, she's got a kink in her back. I don't know how well you can see it. She eats. Little bit. Yeah. She eats and sheds and does everything fine. And she's stunning. So when Billy saw her and noticed she was doing okay, he offered her to me so she'd have a nice, loving home for a long time.
Yeah. She looks fantastic. I love that pattern.
Yeah, and jungles are another really great carpet species because they keep this dark black, but they turn this like highlighter yellow as well. It's really stunning.
It's a gorgeous pattern. I have a weakness for animals with yellow and black. My logo can attest to that.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, so she's great. She is a more gentle carpet python baby, but I think it's just another great example of how Morelia in general can be really awesome. Family pets for people newer in the hobby. And she lives in a 12 by 18 by 12 length by width by height or something like that. That she has, and it has some perching, but it also has hides for her. Because once again, semi-arboreal, sometimes they like to perch and sometimes they don't.
Cool.
Awesome.
Here's another question come up. Somebody wants to know which isopods you have.
I only have 3 species right now. I have giant canyons, I have Dalmatians, and I have like a powder blue and orange mix. I'm newer to the isopod game. Unfortunately, I had too much ventilation in a couple colonies I had, and I lost them while being gone on a trip. So I'm hoping to get some more in the future. I really, really like the clowns. That's one I had that I was really sad I lost.
Oh yeah. Well,
yeah.
Let me know. I do have a lot of clowns, so if you're interested,
I will. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna put this one away, and I'm gonna grab you a green tree python, and then I think that'll be the rest of my animals. Okay. Give me just one moment.
Sure. Oh, thank you, Therapod Hunter, for the super chat. Good point. Yeah, I find several herbal teas can be good for reducing stress, and I go for that sometimes. Can be very helpful. One I like is lemon balm tea, which is very similar to peppermint. It's a closely related plant, and yeah, cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. And here comes the green tree.
Yeah. So, oh gosh. Okay. So this is my green tree python. One of my green tree pythons. Can you see him okay?
Yeah. It's coming through pretty well.
All right. So
gorgeous.
We talked about a semi-arboreal species. This is when you get into, this is just an arboreal species. So this is just simply a piece of bamboo that this guy does not leave ever. So, This is a so green tree pythons have localities. They don't necessarily have morphs. There's only one morph of green trees, and it's albino. And I think it's pretty much only in the UK right now. But he's got a little bit of a typical green tree attitude. So if he strikes at me, I am prepared. But he is a kind of a mutt green tree. So he's not a specific locality. He's kind of just a group of designer animals and different backgrounds on him. So really cool thing about green tree pythons is that they're born either yellow or red. So this is a red neo, so a red neonate green tree python that has turned entirely green. He's got that really cool yellow face mask, and then it's hard to see in not natural lighting, but also has some pretty cool blue colors on them. So I've got better pictures. And I keep trying to show him to you, but he just turns around because he wants to bite me. The other way. So he's not as happy to be here as I am. But yeah, green tree pythons are awesome. These are a species that people aren't going to tell you it's not a beginner species, but my first ever snake was a green tree python, and I think I'm doing okay. So,
cool.
Oh gosh, yeah. So, they can be a little bit more testy. They can have a little bit more specific requirements as far. Oh my gosh, it looks like he's talking. As far as temperature and humidity requirements, but do your research, ask a lot of questions, and buy a healthy captive born animal, and you're going to succeed for sure.
Well, that is awesome. Well, I must say it's fantastic to have the snake right up in the camera. That was such a cool shot.
I hope so.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. And I love the fact that it's just gripping, like you're saying, completely arboreal snake. Probably can't get much more arboreal than this species, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Tie with some other species, but that's fantastic. Would you say that their space requirements are pretty modest just because they tend to hang out on that branch?
Yes. So males are going to be a lot more active than females. So this is a male. And so he is moving around a lot more. My females very rarely move from their one spot. They usually find the warmest spot in their cage and they stay there. As far as caging, this animal right now is in a rack right over here. It's like I think it's a 64 quart rack. I am moving this animal to an 18-inch cube cage from black box cages just because I want to be able to see him more because look at him. And my other adult male who's, oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm getting so confused, right in here. This is a 36 by 18 by 18 cage, which is a little bit bigger than like the standard. Usually the standard's a 24-inch cube, but I really like that they can move around, that I can add multiple water bowls, multiple perches, and I like that personally.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. I love getting to see the contrast between the different types of snakes and how they move or don't move, and body types and everything.
I'm going to see if I can shine the light on him a little bit. Maybe you can see some of those blues. I don't know if it's going to work or not. Looks like it won't work. You can kind of see it's almost like on that dorsal line. Do you see that a bit?
I can see a different color there.
Yeah, so that's like a nice light blue. I've got better pictures. Unfortunately, because I live in a cold area, I can't get a lot of outdoor pics or sunlight pics.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So Random T's asking about the tip of the tail being so much darker. Is that a normal thing for this species?
Yeah, so that depends on locality. So different localities are going to have different colored tails. You can usually take a better guess at locality based on the tail, and I'm not going to tell you which is which because I can't remember off the top of my head. But green tree pythons do this really cool thing called caudal luring. So they sit super still on their branch, and they use that tail to like twitch like a worm. So that darker color looks like a worm and is going to stick out a bit more than the the green that they use to hide in the trees. So that's what that's for. So when prey came up to bite that worm, they're going to get it. So not all of them have that dark black tail, but a lot of them do.
Very cool. I love the cuddle luring
Yeah.
thing. There's a few more. There's like a viper that does that and looks like a spider on the end of its tail.
Yes. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
cool stuff going on. Yeah.
And it's also similar to, I think it's pretty similar to what like some species of fish do, and then also snapping turtles with that
tongue.
with that tongue. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So this guy here, his name is Gemini, and he is a bit of a drama queen. He likes to get a little bit of the attention. So
Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are getting close to our time. It's been really fun. I want to make sure a couple of things. Is there any question that we have not addressed that we need to cover here? Anything that you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
Oh man, no, I think I just appreciate being asked to be on. It's such a pleasure to get to talk with you, and especially because you do have such a different audience than I do. I appreciate it. I also just want to encourage, if anyone has questions about encouraging women in the hobby, or finding maybe women in the hobby to invite on their shows or buy from, reach out. I'll help as much as I can. And awesome. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. I really was glad to see that you're excited to come on the show, and I've been excited for it as well. Oh, Scott has a question for you.
Yeah.
What's your dream animal?
Oh, okay. That's such a good question. So honestly, for the longest time, my dream animal was green tree pythons. Since I was a kid, it's been my absolute favorite animal. So just to be able to have it is like a dream for me. But if I could keep any animal in the world, oh my goodness, that's so hard, because it really is green trees. Is that totally basic? I just love them. I think there's certain lines of green trees I'd really like to have. I'd like to have a pretty melanistic green tree or a blue green tree python, but I love those. And then I also just love diamond pythons, basically anything Morelia. I want to get my hands on it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think to me, when I think of, how cool would that to be on a green tree python? You've got green tree python. That's so cool.
Yeah, I've got a few of them now.
yeah, exactly. So, well, awesome. Well, it's been great to have you. We really appreciate it. I want to make sure that everybody knows where to get in contact with you. I've had that banner down here for Instagram.
Yes.
The stream, so everybody check that out. And then, of course, you've got the Modern Medusa Podcast.
Yep. And then, the only other thing we didn't mention with the podcast is that it is more adult centric. I do use some adult language. So if you have kids listening, I would have other suggestions for better podcasts than my own. But if you're an adult and you're okay with it, please feel free to listen.
Well, thank you for the warning there. With that can be important when you have kids listening, things like that. So. But I've enjoyed your podcast, like I said, from the beginning. Really appreciate it. It's a great podcast. So keep that in mind. And also the Female Herpers and Reptile Keepers Facebook group.
Yes. Please feel free to join. We're always excited to build our community.
And thank you, everyone, for joining in. Thank you for the super chats, all the participation, all the positive feedback that you've given. And take care. Have a good evening, everyone. And if Dominique, you'll hang on for just a minute after the broadcast ends.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.